In a day of ceremony and sadness, Scotland bids farewell to Queen Elizabeth. King Charles and his brothers and sister walk behind their mother's coffin up the Royal Mile in Edinburgh.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit.
Queen Elizabeth's 4 children stand in silent vigil around her coffin in St Giles Cathedral. And this is the scene live in the cathedral as members of the public file past the coffin and pay their respects. Earlier in the day, the King made his first address to the UK Parliament in Westminster. We'll bring you the details of the preparations for the state funeral next Monday. Also on the programme, Ukrainian troops celebrate as they retake 20 towns and villages in the north of the country, sending Russian forces into retreat. The police officer who shot dead Chris Kaba, an unarmed black man, has been suspended from duty.
An England win, a poignant and significant test match in so many ways.
And England complete their remarkable summer, clinching the series with a 9-wicket victory over South Africa.
And stay with us here on BBC News, where we will bring you continuing coverage of events plus analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world.
Good evening. Members of the public in Edinburgh have had their first chance to view Queen Elizabeth's coffin and pay their respects ahead of her state funeral next Monday. Thousands of people lined the streets to watch the late Queen as she was taken from the palace of Holyrood House up the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving, honouring her life. King Charles III led the royal family in solemn procession behind his mother's coffin. The Queen will now lie at rest in St Giles Cathedral for 24 hours before being flown down to London. Kirsty Walk is there for us this evening. Kirsty.
Well, tonight, thousands upon thousands of people, from the very young to the elderly, are queuing more than a mile beyond here for 6 hours or more to take part in the vigil and walk past the coffin of Queen Elizabeth, where she lies at rest in St Giles Cathedral. Perhaps the most moving sight at the Thanksgiving service was the crown of Scotland, dating from the time of James V, the oldest crown jewels in the United Kingdom, on top of the coffin. It was a very solemn reminder of her duty and her faith. Today, many people in Edinburgh and Scotland have been paying their respects to the Queen quietly and with great affection. It's another chapter of royal history in these ancient streets after the long reign of a Queen who was very much at home here in Scotland. Our special correspondent Alan Little is here in Edinburgh and has been following the day's events.
This will be a reign finely attuned to the sensibilities of Scotland and the distinctiveness of its traditions and institutions. The King returned today to a Scotland that has been diverging from the rest of the UK politically for 40 years. Support for independence is still below 50%, but not by much, and it's much higher amongst the young. Nicola Sturgeon at Edinburgh Airport to greet him wants an independent Scotland to retain the monarchy, with King Charles and his heirs on the Scottish throne. As King, Charles will have to keep his views on that prospect to himself. The principle of constitutional monarchy chimes with public opinion, and there was no shortage of public affection for the new king as he progressed down the Royal Mile to his official residence, where the coffin of his late mother has been lying at rest. That the King has chosen to begin his reign with visits to Edinburgh, Belfast and Cardiff is telling. It suggests that the future of the Union is at the heart of his concerns. The early decades of his late mother's reign were characterised by the long, slow contraction of British imperial power around the world. He will be alert to the possibility that his own reign could come to be defined by the continuation of that process here and the eventual dissolution of the United Kingdom itself. But all that is for another day. A bearer party of the Royal Regiment of Scotland brought the Queen's coffin from Holyrood House back into public view. For today, the eyes of the world intrude on private sorrow, as the Queen's family subordinate their own grief to the imperatives of public ritual. Queen Elizabeth's 4 children walked behind their mother's hearse. Briefly, an insult was shouted at the Duke of York.
Andrew, you're a sick old man!
It brought this reaction from an otherwise subdued crowd. The Royal Mile of Edinburgh is an ancient thoroughfare, steep in its progress towards St Giles Cathedral, the historic High Kirk of Edinburgh, where the Queen had sometimes worshipped, not as head of the church here, but simply as a member. Here they placed on the coffin the crown of Scotland, made in the 16th century for the Queen's ancestor, James V. It is the centrepiece of the Scottish crown jewels, also known as the Honours of Scotland. Consider the quiet symbolism of this. It is a gesture toward the distinctive character of Scotland's historic nationhood.
I welcome all of you to St Giles Cathedral. Here, John Knox confronted Mary, Queen of Scots. Here, James VI argued about liturgy. Here, our late Queen received the honours of Scotland.
Gracious is the Lord and righteous. Yea, our God is merciful. The Lord preserve the simple. I was brought low and he helped me.
The Queen's coffin now rests here for 24 hours. Tomorrow it will be taken to London to lie in state at Westminster Great Hall. The Scottish Parliament his mother opened 23 years ago is the centre of public and political life here now. This evening the King and Queen Consort were escorted into the chamber by the King's bodyguard in Scotland, the Royal Company of Archers. The MSPs stood for a 2-minute silence. Then each party leader spoke in support of a motion of condolence.
Our nation is in mourning today for a Queen whose loss we have not yet begun to come to terms with. We are deeply honoured by the presence today of His Majesty King Charles III and the Queen Consort. Your Majesty, we stand ready to support you as you continue your own life of service and as you build on the extraordinary legacy of your beloved mother, our Queen. Queen Elizabeth, Queen of Scots, we are grateful for her life. May she now rest in peace.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
Tonight, the King, his sister and his brothers stood in silent vigil at their mother's coffin. In life, Queen Elizabeth came to embody that deep and abiding bond the King evoked. The bond of a shared history and a common identity across the United Kingdom. What will remain of that legacy when this period of mourning is over and she recedes into the middle distance of our collective memory? That question will be at the heart of the new reign that began when she died. Alan Little, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, tens of thousands of people have lined the Royal Mile today. Some had been here since 6 o'clock this morning, and I spoke to the crowd. I spoke to a section not wider than 10 metres. And who was there was extraordinary. There were people from New Zealand, from Brazil, from Chicago, and closer to home from Preston, Haddington, Argyll and Aberdeen. One shouted out to me that she was Elizabeth the Great. And when I asked them what their overwhelming thought was, people quite spontaneously said to me, it was about constancy. It was about the Queen being a constant. Our Scotland editor, James Cook, has been speaking to people who came to the Royal Mile to pay their respects.
In the heart of Edinburgh this afternoon, an ancient ritual in the modern age. This nation changed beyond measure in the time of Elizabeth, and now there's the sense of a country at a crossroads.
We've lost a good lady, a lady that served her country well, 96 years, and worked right up until 2 days before she passed.
What do you think of the new king?
I've got mixed views upon the king. I think he's got big shoes to fill.
I'm here because it's an historical moment for all British citizens or people who live here. So I feel it very important because it's a big part. She was a big part of our history.
Why are you here today?
Because I'm a proud patriot of my own country. I think the monarchy holds a place to hold tradition, you know what I mean, and pride that I feel is going out the window, you know what I mean. There's not enough patriots left in Britain and Scotland anymore.
What do you think of the new king?
I think he'll be a great king. I hope that he brings some more modern things to the royal family. Things about the environment, what the king represents and what he's been doing as a prince. I'd like him to bring that up with the royal family and look forward to see his reign.
In 1953, when the Queen first came here as monarch, these streets were packed. They are thronged again today. There is clear support for Elizabeth here. But what does this tell us about the future of this country?
Edinburgh, Queen Elizabeth's northern capital, prepares to greet Her Majesty.
From the start, the Queen clearly felt a deep affinity for Scotland and its place in the UK. At her Silver Jubilee in 1977, she publicly stressed what she called the benefits of union. But in recent times, support for independence has surged.
If the union with Scotland in particular, but also the United Kingdom as we know it, is to be preserved, then the monarch has a role to play. The monarch has, obviously want to try and maintain what has been there for centuries.
How does support for the monarchy in Scotland break down by party?
Yes, so there's clear differences. So if you're talking to people who would tend to support the Conservative Party, support's in the high 70s. If you're talking to people who support the Liberal Democrats and Labour, support's in the 60s. But if you're talking to people who support the SNP, then support is much lower, in the high 20s.
And yet the SNP is in favour of the monarchy, even if they achieve an independent Scotland.
Yes, there's a distinction between what the party leadership has said and what supporters of independence actually want. And there you find more tepid support for the monarchy.
Not here, though. Not tonight, as thousands queue to file past the Queen's coffin.
People are saying you could have watched this at home in comfort on the television, and we could have, but this is history, and we'll never do this again.
We were in our tartan, which is Hunting Ross, and this is a very, very emotional time. She was quite an incredible lady. We felt as though we knew her, even though we never ever saw her.
Our prayers are with you, Your Majesty.
And so, as her son, the King, mourns, the people offer comfort. James Cook, BBC News, at the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh.
And you can see some of these queues behind me. The queues go right round Parliament Square, in front of the Signet Library, in the front of St Giles. And people aren't taking very long to go through. They've waited for hours and hours, but they're moving quite swiftly. And now we can look inside and see there the coffin of Queen Elizabeth on the catafalque with the crown of Scotland lying at her head towards the front of the coffin. And people are very respectful. Some people have been shedding tears. Some people stopping, showing their children as if they want their children to know about this history. And particularly I was struck about older people going past, some infirm, who've been waiting for such a long time, and it meant so much to them because she has been monarch for most of their lives. And being inside St Giles is a place of such peace. And I think that catafalque being so extraordinarily plain speaks to a very simple church, despite its cathedral status as was. And at the front of the church, you can see at the front of the church there is the most beautiful stained glass window, a modern window, which is a memorial to Robert Burns, the National Bard. And I'm joined now by James Cook. James Cook, extraordinary scenes here, and actually a quite moving 2 days.
It's been remarkable, Kirsty, hasn't it? I mean, really, this is extraordinary. We've never, ever seen anything like this before.
And we probably never will again.
Probably never will again. So I think there's a lot to take in, so maybe we should step back and try to tease apart some of the strands here of what's happening. I mean, first of all, I think very obviously we've seen over the last few days, and we're seeing again now, a display of affection for a monarch.
A particular person,
A particular person, this monarch, Elizabeth, and indeed even love. We're secondly, I think, seeing sympathy for people who have lost their mother, their grandmother, and particularly sympathy for the king, who is, of course, in mourning his mother at a grand old age, but mourning nonetheless. But then I think we maybe have to take a step back and say, well, what does this tell us in the long run? Because over the reign of Elizabeth, the Elizabethan age, Scotland's first Elizabethan age, of course, not like England, over that time, the union of this country that was really forged through empire and later forged through the survival of the Second World War, well, what happened? Those links weakened during Elizabeth's reign. There's no doubt about that. So while we are definitely seeing here support for that 1603 union of the Scottish and English crowns, the question is, one, will it last? And two, what does that tell us about support or otherwise for the 1707 union of the parliaments, the political union?
James, thanks very much. Fiona.
Kirsty and James, thank you. Well, earlier today, King Charles visited the UK Parliament for the first time since taking the throne, along with the Queen Consort. The King heard messages of condolence from both houses in the ancient Westminster Hall before delivering his response. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witcher reports on the King's visit to Parliament.
To Westminster Hall, the ancient building which has been at the centre of so much British history for 1,000 years. The setting over the centuries for moments of national significance, for celebration and sorrow. The setting today for Britain's parliamentarians, from the House of Commons and the House of Lords, to come together to pay tribute to a past monarch and to greet a new one. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, spoke about the nation's loss.
It is a loss to all of us, but we know, most of all, it is a loss to you, Your Majesty, and to the royal family.
The King spoke of his new responsibilities.
As I stand before you today, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us and which reminds us of the vital parliamentary traditions to which members of both houses dedicate yourselves with such personal commitment for the betterment of us all.
10 years ago, the late Queen had addressed parliamentarians in Westminster Hall during her Diamond Jubilee. She'd spoken about the long span of British history.
I have been privileged to witness some of that history, and with the support of my family, rededicate myself to the service of our great country and its people, now and in the years to come.
Today, the late Queen's son committed himself to follow her example.
Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
The parliamentarians sang the national anthem, sung now for the King, Charles III. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
The Northern Ireland Assembly has been meeting to pay tributes to the Queen. The Speaker's personal tribute was followed by members of all political parties. The King will carry out a number of engagements in Northern Ireland tomorrow as part of the new monarch's programme of visits across the UK. And as we've been hearing, the Queen will lie at rest tonight at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. Tomorrow, her coffin will be moved from there to Edinburgh Airport, then by plane to RAF Northolt and on to London, where the Queen will spend a final night at Buckingham Palace. On Wednesday afternoon, the Queen's coffin will travel from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster. Crowds will be able to watch as the cortege makes the journey through central London. Thursday marks the first of 4 full days that the Queen's body will lie in state in Westminster Hall. Hundreds of thousands of members of the public are expected to pay their respects. On Sunday evening, a minute's silence will be held across the UK at 8 p.m. And then on Monday, the Queen's lying in state will end and the coffin will be taken in procession to Westminster Abbey for the state funeral, which is a bank holiday in the UK. Details have been revealed about how people can attend the Queen's lying in state. Large crowds are expected and there are warnings people may have to wait for hours, even overnight. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has more details on the preparations in London.
If you can measure love and respect in flowers in people, then this is quite a statement. London's Green Park, now the park of many colours, the powerful scent of flowers hanging in the air. But however many are here now will be dwarfed by the numbers who will stand in a very British way for hours and hours through the days and nights to file past the Queen's coffin. People who do make it to Westminster Hall, where the Queen's body will lie in state, have been told to expect very long queues. The fear is they could last up to 24 hours, and mourners have been warned they may have to wait overnight. If the lines are too long, they could be paused so that people are unable to join. People have been asked to dress respectfully. No flowers, cameras or filming allowed. Camping out on the Mall since Saturday, Maria from Newcastle plans to stay for the lying in state and funeral.
She gave 70 years of service to us and it's the least I could do. Got to go and pay my respects to the Queen. She's done so much for us as a country. It's, you know, I've got to do it. I have. I feel that's my duty to do it.
Vanessa Nathakumaran hopes to be the first in the queue. Home a bench on Lambeth Bridge until they open the doors.
Our part is to say last goodbye, which is very sad, but I wanted to make sure that I want to be part of it and start queuing up from today because I heard the queue is going to be very long.
More details on the route for the queue are due shortly, but it's likely to begin near a park by Tower Bridge and travel a couple of miles up the Thames, passing the London Eye and the Palace of Westminster, then across Lambeth Bridge.
And the smell is just incredible.
Amanda and Moira came to lay flowers but hope to return for the lying in state.
I think it's a once in a lifetime. You just want to be part of it.
And are you prepared to be in those, what are going to be very long queues?
Oh, well, there's the thing.
Well, we're made of strong stuff.
Yeah,
so
so
put it to the
hopefully,
test.
Yeah, we would give it a go.
But there are some predictions that crowds could reach up to 1 million in the coming days.
We put a little note to say thank you for all that she's done and love all of our names.
Do you think you're going to come down for lying in state with the family?
I don't think we will, because I think it'd be a bit too busy for the kids.
Yeah.
I think that's why we came down today, because it's nice and relaxing today. It's like the calm before the storm, before it gets really busy.
It will be an enormous operation for the transport system and the police. The Met's commissioner on his first day in the job.
It's a massive challenge for the Metropolitan Police and for me personally.
but we have been preparing for many, many years.
The ceremony will soon be replaced with simplicity as the quiet walk past the Queen's coffin begins.
Well, Lucy's outside Buckingham Palace for us now. And Lucy, you've got more details about the procession of the late Queen's coffin in London and how people might be able to see it.
Well, that's right. The focus of national mourning will soon pivot back to London, to the capital. And we have those details of the processional route. That's when the Queen's coffin will leave here at Buckingham Palace and travel up the Mall to Westminster Hall for lying in state. That will happen on Wednesday at 2:22, and the coffin will be followed by members of the royal family. But what they've tried to do, as they have done through this period, is to include members of the public to try and see what is happening. So there will be positions up the Mall, up Whitehall and in Horse Guards Parade, viewing positions for the public to be able to see what is happening. And if those are full, well, screens will be erected in Hyde Park. There will then be the lying in state, and we are expecting hundreds of thousands of people here and some disruption to the travel system. But by tomorrow evening, there will certainly be an air of poignancy here, because the Queen's coffin will return here, will return to Buckingham Palace, to her home for the final time.
Lucy Manning at Buckingham Palace, thank you. And that's the scene at Buckingham Palace. Let's go back now to the scene in Edinburgh at St Giles Cathedral, with the Queen's coffin lying in state there, covered, of course, by the Royal Standard. As members of the public file past quietly, respectfully, paying their own personal tributes to the monarch, the King's Bodyguards of Scotland standing in vigil around the catafalque. And people have been queuing for hours to be able to come and pay their respects. The queue is at the moment about a mile long, but undeterred, people are coming, some openly weeping, coming to make their own personal, quiet tribute to the Queen. And let's talk now to our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell. Because so many personal tributes to the Queen, as we've seen just there at St Giles Cathedral, and Prince Harry made his own public tribute too.
Quite a day, once again. And yes, a touching written tribute from Harry, describing the Queen as a guiding compass. Granny, he wrote, I'm forever grateful from my earliest childhood memories to meeting you as my Commander-in-Chief, to the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved great-grandchildren. And he appeared to reach out to his father, which perhaps is encouraging. We now honour my father in his new role as King Charles III, but no reference at all to his brother.
Well, words from Prince Harry there. It's been a day for, of course, all members of the royal family, but particularly for the new king.
Yes, and an important speech at Westminster this morning, affirming this absolutely fundamental principle of the Crown in Parliament. I mean, we're talking here about the real bedrock of our constitutional settlement, the constitutional monarch working within the framework of a parliamentary democracy. And then to Edinburgh, as we've seen, walking behind his mother's coffin to St Giles Cathedral with his siblings, and another important speech to the Scottish Parliament. Now, if monarchy is to be a focus for unity, as it must be, Scotland, I suggest, is probably his biggest challenge here in the United Kingdom. Can this monarch, can Charles III protect the position of the monarchy in Scotland? Can he protect the 300-year-old union of the crowns?
Nicholas Witchell, thank you very much. Well, let's look at some of today's other news. And Ukraine says it's retaken as many as 20 towns and villages in the east of the country in the space of the last 24 hours, with Russian troops in retreat. Russia has hit back overnight with missile strikes on the city of Kharkiv, causing blackouts. But President Putin's tactics have been criticised by one of the leading military commanders fighting on the ground. Officially, the Kremlin says its forces are regrouping, not retreating. So this was the situation just a week ago, with Russia still in control of much of the east of the country. That's the area in red. But the latest mapping in the last 24 hours shows significant gains by the Ukrainians. That's in purple to the east and as far south as Izium. From the capital, Kyiv, our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse sent this report.
War can be both symbolic as well as significant. And today was just that. Russian ambitions once again abandoned. Moscow calls this a regrouping. It's more like a retreat, and a quick one. Kiev is claiming to have taken back almost all of the Kharkiv region. Even Russian officials admit to being outnumbered by 8-1 here.
Ізюм був, є і буде Україна.
Izum was, is, and always will be Ukraine, says this soldier. This is territory which Russia fought hard to take, lost in the space of days.
We met them with tears in our eyes. We could not imagine that they would come so unexpectedly, but we've been waiting for them almost half a year, and we are so happy.
Whenever Russia is frustrated, it responds. This time accused of striking civilian targets. A major power station reduced to this, causing trains to stop working on Kharkiv's metro. For some, much more was lost than just power. Ukraine is pushing on more than one front. That has risks, but it's enough to worry one of Putin's biggest allies, Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. If changes are not made, he said in an online post, I will be forced to go to the country's leadership. This is the most significant Russian withdrawal since they pulled out from Kiev in late March. The human cost for both countries remains huge, and on whether it's a price worth paying, the majority of Ukrainians feel there is no choice. This is about survival, and the idea of making any concessions to Russia remains unfathomable. The Kremlin anticipated taking Ukraine in a matter of days. 201 of them later, it's going backwards. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kiev.
Let's talk to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow for us this evening. Steve, this looks like a pretty significant setback for Russia. What's the reaction been there?
Well, the reaction from the Kremlin today was, this is no problem at all. It's quite interesting that Vladimir Putin made no mention of Russia's retreat. But territorial losses don't mean they didn't happen. They did. And actually, a lot of pro-Russia social media groups and Telegram channels did notice them, and they blamed the Russian Defense Ministry for mistakes on the battlefield. But I want to go back to Vladimir Putin and make this point that, I used to view Putin as a top-notch escape artist, almost sort of a Kremlin version of Harry Houdini, who, no matter how many ropes or chains were tying him up, he always seemed to get out of the most difficult situation and come out on top. But all that seemed to change after Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, which has gone not according to plan, clearly not gone according to plan. And there's a problem here, I think, for Vladimir Putin, because when an authoritarian leader starts to lose that aura of invincibility, then that can be very dangerous for that leader.
Steve in Moscow, thank you. Well, let's talk now to our international editor, Jeremy Byrne, who's here with me in the studio. So, Jeremy, this looks like good news for Ukraine, but Russia is still a mighty enemy. How significant is this latest development?
Well, it doesn't mean they've won the war, but it means they've won a very significant battle. And the Ukrainians also believe they've answered some really important questions. Can they break the stalemate? Can they take territory back? Yes. Can they use Western weapons effectively? Yes. Now, why does this matter? It's because voices have been raised in some NATO countries that the economic costs of opposing Russia, opposing Putin, supporting Ukraine might be just too great, particularly over a long, hard winter. And the Ukrainians will now say, look, we've shown we can win, guys. Give us more weapons. We'll finish the job here. As for the Russians, it's clearly a rout. It's not a fighting retreat. Unlike the Ukrainians, who believe they don't have any option but to fight, it's clear that the Russian soldiers are not nearly quite so certain about why it is they're there and why they're fighting. They've got terrible morale. But there's another point here, I think, and that is that the summer stalemate was in a way more comfortable for a lot of less hawkish NATO countries than either a Ukrainian victory or a Ukrainian defeat. Defeat, of course, would be a disaster for NATO. But Ukrainian victory, what would Putin do then? Because, of course, don't forget that consistently since day one, he has rattled that nuclear saber. He has threatened, perhaps in the right circumstances, the wrong circumstances, to use nuclear weapons. Big talk, but everybody would be foolish not to take it seriously.
Jeremy, thank you. The police firearms officer involved in the shooting dead of a black man in South London last Monday has been suspended from duty. Chris Cabba died when the car he was driving was stopped in Streatham. The Independent Office for Police Conduct has launched a homicide investigation. Tonight, Mr. Cabba's family and friends held a vigil a week on from his killing, as Greg Mackenzie reports.
The family of Chris Cabba holding a candlelit vigil tonight on a South London street, the scene of last Monday's fatal police shooting. 24-year-old Chris Cabba was shot dead following a police pursuit 7 days ago. He was unarmed. After mounting pressure from the family and their legal representatives, the Metropolitan Police have tonight suspended the officer who fired the gun.
He should have been suspended anyway. We shouldn't be grateful for him being suspended. There's a criminal investigation going on. If it was any other job and you're being criminally investigated, you'll be suspended immediately, effectively. And I was asked earlier if the new Met Commissioner, if he wants to come down here. I said that's the least we deserve. Because he's coming to see flowers, but we're going to have to go see a dead body.
The independent police watchdog, the IOPC, has launched a homicide investigation, but says this does not mean criminal charges will be brought against the officer. In a statement issued by the Metropolitan Police this evening, the Assistant Commissioner Andy Pearson said the decision to suspend the officer involved in last Monday's shooting had careful consideration of a number of factors, including the significant impact of public confidence and in light of the IOPC's homicide investigation. Campaigners say tensions have been high in the community and are questioning why it has taken so long for the Met Police to act. Greg Mackenzie, BBC News.
COVID infections in the UK have fallen to their lowest level since October last year. The Office for National Statistics says fewer than 1 million people had COVID at the end of August. That's about 1 in 70, down from 1 in 15 in mid-July. Health experts are predicting a rise in infections this winter, though, and are urging the most vulnerable to get booster jabs. The latest figures show that the UK economy grew more slowly than expected for the month of July. The Office for National Statistics says it grew by 0.2% after dropping by 0.6% in June. Our economics editor Faisal Islam is with me. So these don't look good, these figures. How do we interpret them?
Now, we've already had a lot of forecasts about a recession, for example, from the Bank of England. When they've talked about that, it's been mainly in terms of timing at the end of this year into next year. The figures that you've just mentioned, the difference here is that they're talking about the possibility we might be in recession right now, about 5 or 6 months into a recession that could have started in April. Between April and June, in the second quarter, the economy already shrunk a little bit, but it had been hoped that in the third quarter, so between July and September, that there'd been a rebound. What today's figures show is that that rebound is proving elusive, that the high energy bills were weighing on households and also businesses using less electricity. On top of that, there's also a technical impact from the extra bank holiday we're going to get because of the Queen's state funeral. When you put it together, expectations that we could already be in a mild recession. But what really matters is what happens in the future and the impact of the government's energy price guarantee. We think that that will cost £100 to £150 billion. We don't know yet because we haven't got the detail. Although energy companies for households, they have got some of the detail they need to start to process bills. We haven't got that detail yet for businesses. Really important that businesses get that clarity soon. Perhaps we might get it at some sort of tax and spending announcement, which looks likely to happen next week, though again that hasn't been announced by the government.
OK, Faisal, our economics editor, thank you very much. England's cricketers finished the men's season with another victory today. At the Oval, they scored the runs they needed to complete a 9-wicket win over South Africa in a test match played in unique circumstances, as Joe Wilson reports.
26 minutes, that's all England needed.
It's the series win for England.
They finished the match and one of their most successful summers. 130 for 1 in the second innings, but every player will remember Saturday, when the match resumed after the death of Queen Elizabeth.
Honestly, I'll never forget walking down the stairs there on day 3 to complete silence from 30,000 people. Actually, like, you know, the old saying, the silence was deafening. Never experienced anything like before. It was seriously special.
Ben Stokes' first season as England captain has been an all-round triumph. 2 matches won against South Africa, 6 across the summer. And that after one of England's most disappointing winters. Yeah, the Ashes. That was January. The plan has been to liberate players like opening batter Zach Crawley by tolerating failures and always urging positivity. It's a meeting of minds between Stokes and the new coach, Brendan McCullum, an irrepressible cricketer for New Zealand in his day.
I thought English cricket had a lot of talent. It's got a lot more talent than I thought, and I knew these guys were good, but they're a lot better than I thought. And that's a very privileged position to be in, to be able to help these guys to go out there and perform for their country. And it's been an absolute thrill right throughout the season.
But in these Oval celebrations, there was also restraint. Smiles, no champagne. There is a context to everything. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Yes, and talking of that context, let's return now to the live pictures of the former Queen's coffin lying in state at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. What you're seeing there is the rows of people who have queued, many for hours, to be able to walk past Queen Elizabeth's coffin as she lies in rest at St Giles Cathedral. It's been a remarkable day in Edinburgh, with the coffin and the cortege going up the Royal Mile, followed by King Charles III, his 2 brothers and his sisters. They walked slowly behind, with finally the coffin being brought into St Giles Cathedral, where it will stay until 4 o'clock tomorrow. So people have the opportunity to pay their respects throughout the night if they choose. And judging by the size of the queues outside the cathedral, it looks as if they will do exactly that until tomorrow afternoon, when the Queen's coffin will be taken to Edinburgh Airport and then brought back to London. So that's the scene there tonight in Edinburgh. And in the last of the BBC's interviews with former Prime Ministers, I spoke to Boris Johnson about his memories of the former monarch. Given that we're in a period of mourning, it wasn't discussion about his very recent period in office, though there will, of course, be a time for just such interviews. I started by asking him about his last meeting with Queen Elizabeth just 2 days before she died.
The last audience I had with her, one of the reasons it was so shocking on the 8th to hear about her death was because in that audience, you know, she'd been absolutely on it. Because
that was just 2 days before.
Just 2 days before her death. And she was actively focused on geopolitics, on UK politics, quoting statesmen from the 50s. It was quite extraordinary.
And she seemed well?
And she seemed very, very bright, very focused. She was clearly not well, and I think that was the thing that I found so moving when I heard about her when we all heard about her death on Thursday, 2 days later. I just thought how incredible that her sense of duty had kept her going in the way that it had.
What are your favourite memories of the Queen?
She had such a knowledge of history, of the sweep of this country's progress over 70 years. It's why I think she should be Elizabeth the Great, by the way, because if you look at what happened to this country in her reign, the immeasurable advances in prosperity, in opportunity, in longevity, whatever your metric is, because of all that, she was able to reassure, and no matter how bad things were, she could always encourage you.
And with those weekly meetings, we've had Prime Ministers past talking about how much they valued those meetings. It occurred to me, when so much might be going on in Parliament, was there ever a point where you thought, I know it's important and valuable, but I'm not sure I've got the time? I mean, was there ever a moment where you felt like that?
What, the audiences? No, you must be joking. No, because the audiences were just a fantastic break from everything else. And so the audiences were a kind of
so they were a highlight.
Moment of, well, of course, they're a wonderful moment of tranquility. I would say to her, look, we've got a terrible problem with Brexit. We've got to get the bill through. We've got to make sure that we come out of the European Union. The people have voted for it. It's got to be done. And she would listen to me and she would nod and she would ask questions. And her method with prime ministers was really to try to just help them with advice of the most general kind, and that's what she did.
During the COVID pandemic, when you yourself were extremely ill, and the Queen made a speech to reassure the nation, and she said, we will meet again soon.
Yeah.
How important was that speech? What role did that perform, do you think?
I remember when we were working with the palace to organise it, we knew that even if you got me and the leader of the opposition, every single member of the cabinet and all the pop stars you could find in the world, and you got us all together to try to get a message to the British public, it wouldn't have the same impact as that broadcast.
The Queen had to bury her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, and it later emerged that Downing Street staff had a party on the eve of the funeral. I'm just wondering how you then, of course, had to see the Queen after that. How did you two get past that?
Well, of course, because of her great sense of her constitutional function, she never got into that sort of conversation. She was really absolutely focused on what she saw as the important issues.
So it was never discussed?
No, I can tell you it was absolutely not.
Let's talk about our new king, Charles III. How do you think he will be different as a king?
I think if you look at what he's done in his life, it's already been pretty remarkable. He's done a lot of very good stuff, whether it's on architectural, built environment, agriculture. He's been a prophet ahead of his time on the environment more generally, and he quoted Hamlet in his wonderful speech the other day. And I think that now that he has been put on, to quote Hamlet, he will prove most royal. He will prove most kingly.
Boris Johnson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Queen's death is being marked in Ireland, with many government buildings flying the Irish tricolour at half-mast. Her visit to Ireland in 2011 was widely seen as a landmark in relations between the two countries. In the city of Cork, many people remember the Queen's visit with great affection. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane is in Cork, and he sent this report.
She had a way about her that brought out the best in Cork. Warm, open, a place to bind old wounds with humour. Joking in the city's English market with a legendary fishmonger who knew he was part of a transformational moment.
You can go on forever being bitter and forever arguing over something that happened 100 years ago or whatever. There's a time to say, it's history, we will remember it. It was horrible stuff when it happened, but let's make our own little bit of history and let's move things forward.
The visit to Ireland was about the formal gestures, the Queen bowing her head to the dead of the Irish Revolution in Dublin, a gesture unimaginable in the long years of the Troubles.
Good to see you. Yeah, nice to be with you.
When I met him in Cork, Ireland's Taoiseach told me the Queen had provided a powerful example of reconciliation.
Well, I thought it was a very poignant moment. I thought it was an extraordinary moment that the head of the British state would come and honour and respect those who fought and died in the Irish War of Independence. It was a great gesture, and more than a gesture, I think, act that really, I think, meant a lot to people.
It was in Cork that the Queen met the heart of Ireland.
Have you enjoyed your trip? Very much.
Building peace through the power of the purely human. 100 years ago, the ruins of war dominated Cork, parts of the city destroyed by British forces. These memorials to two of its Lord Mayors, one assassinated by undercover police, his successor died on hunger strike in a British jail. Yet above them at City Hall today, a symbol of change, the Irish flag flying at half-mast for a British Queen. Inside, a book of condolence filled with warm messages for the monarch and her family. Affection for the Queen here is deeply rooted in her support for the peace process. Her death comes at a time when relations between the Republic and the United Kingdom are more strained than they've been for decades by the row over the Northern Ireland Protocol. The messages call her a healer, a peacemaker. Your hope is that this extraordinary moment in history with this period of mourning provides the opportunity for a reset in what are, let's admit it, pretty difficult Anglo-Irish relations at the moment.
Yes, I would like to think that the visit of Queen Elizabeth II, first of all to Ireland, her passing, will give us all time for reflection and will remind us of the need to proactively nurture the relationship between Britain and Ireland, to enhance it in the time ahead, and that this moment gives us that opportunity for reflection and for resetting in a good way that relationship.
But what does a younger generation feel? I went back to a history class in my old school in Cork.
What freedom is suggested in that Parliament?
There was this message for the people of Britain.
Keep your head up. You know, all the fighting is beyond us now. You know, we can be friends again and just mourn together.
A big part will be played by Charles and how he and what he does for us as well. I think his influence will play a big part in how this goes, even with Brexit, even though we are in kind of tough waters now.
So you want to see him follow his mother's example of reconciliation?
Of course, yeah, and keep the peace.
It was often said that the Queen rose above politics. Perhaps in Ireland it's more apt to say that she expressed its most noble purpose, to offer hope out of the accumulated griefs of history. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Cork.
As King Charles mourns the death of his mother, his wife Camilla has become his Queen Consort, a role which was virtually unthinkable a couple of decades ago. Our royal correspondent Daniela Ralph examines how public attitudes have changed.
Her early duties as Queen Consort, just a step behind her husband at a palace reception over the weekend.
We'll do our best.
But always there, a constant support, as she has been for so much of his life. A walkabout in this new royal role. Once a vilified figure, now being greeted warmly by the crowds as Queen Consort. The rehabilitation of Camilla has been complex.
It was not easy at the beginning, but she conducted herself with such extraordinary grace and dignity. And she has now found a very important place in the hearts of the British people. These are heavy burdens both bear, and they need each other. And all great monarchs have had a great consort.
Together in their 20s until the relationship faltered, she was a significant figure in the King's life long before their marriage. She faced criticism after the royal divorce, then the sudden death of Diana, Princess of Wales. It all forced Camilla to step back. But there was a gradual, carefully managed re-emergence into the spotlight. It marked the start of a slow shift in public opinion. Culminating in their wedding in 2005, supported by the royal family, she was now one of them.
It has been a turbulent journey through public life for the Queen Consort. But Camilla's new role will be vital. She has obviously brought stability and personal happiness to the King, and she will now be crucial to the success of his reign.
It wasn't always easy for her, but you know they've managed to stay together, and they seem to be very happy, and the nation seemed to warm to her, which is great because I think she's wonderful.
She knows him inside out, and I think she'll support him in whatever he does for the country.
I think he needs all the support he can get, really, doesn't he?
Speaking out on the causes she's been passionate about won't stop now.
1 in 4 women in this country will suffer domestic violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4.
Supporting victims of domestic violence will continue to be a priority.
Your Royal Highnesses.
She also brings a lightness of touch to official duties, including this surprise appearance on EastEnders for the Jubilee.
Say a drop a day keeps the doctor away.
At the age of 75, she is now stepping up when many of her friends are retired and stepping back. But they believe she will thrive in her new role.
She's down to earth and normal, like the rest of the nation, but she has massive responsibilities. And so I think we're very lucky.
As the King takes on the job he has waited for so long, he does so with the woman he always refers to as his beloved wife by his side. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
The role of the new Queen Consort there. Right, let's take a look at the weather. Chris Fawkes is here. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Fiona. The north of the UK turned a little bit cooler today, but across the south it actually warmed up. And in London, temperatures reached 27 degrees Celsius, which is pretty warm for a September day, really. We won't reach those kind of figures tomorrow, mind you, because look at this area of cloud working southwards at the moment. This is actually a cold front that's just beginning to make inroads in across North Wales, the North Midlands, and will continue to slowly drift southwards over the next few hours. Behind that, the sky's clear and the air turns quite a lot colder. So for North Midlands, North Wales, Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, underneath these clearing skies, it's going to be a colder kind of night with temperatures 8 to 12 degrees, but warm across southern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures 15 to 17, a lot of cloud, thick enough to give a few patches of light rain and drizzle. And we'll still have those around first thing tomorrow morning, but as you can see, the bulk of the UK having a fine start to the morning with plenty of sunshine. Now into the afternoon, I suspect there will be some rather more persistent rain that will spread in. The big question is how far north it reaches. Perhaps the South Midlands, perhaps reaching parts of southern Wales as well. But away from that, still the emphasis is on a lot of fine and sunny weather. Temperatures about 18 degrees for Belfast and for Glasgow, who are reaching highs of 20 degrees, even though there probably won't be much sunshine around the London area. Now for Wednesday, there's still the threat of a bit of rain across the far south of the country, but again the emphasis is on a lot of fine and dry weather with some sunshine, a few showers coming in across northwestern areas with a stiffening northwesterly wind. That wind will start to knock the temperatures down across these northern areas, so about 17 for Belfast and for Glasgow, but still into the low 20s across southern parts of England and Wales. The trend, though, although the weather is going to stay mostly fine and dry for the rest of this week and into the weekend, it is set to turn a little bit cooler as well, with temperatures around 15 degrees in Manchester and a stiffening, freshening northwesterly wind as well. Fiona.
Chris, thanks very much. The news continues here on BBC One. We're about to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are, but we'll leave you with some of the key images of another historic day. Bye-bye.
O Foscluga gu farshingre getan ayorakesh ezrachamor.
She sets an example of selfless duty.
She has been a constant in all of our lives for over 70 years.